hier auf Englisch sprechen werde. Mein Vortrag ist auf Englisch. Also das ist ja, also wir haben eigentlich gedacht, dass das wird mehrere Leute von außen kommen. Ich frage mich nicht sicher, wie viele Leute hier sind tatsächlich im Raum, die Deutsch sprechen. Und deswegen habe ich mich für Englisch entschieden, habe gedacht, das ist die sichere Nummer. Na gut, wir können trotzdem die Diskussion auf Deutsch führen. Ich glaube, mein Vortrag schließt sich ganz gut an die Vorträge von heute Morgen an. Und ich werde als Ausgangspunkte zwei Punkte, die wir schon gehört haben, aufnehmen. Und zwar eines von Frau Schütz. Sie haben gesagt, das Vertrauen ist mehr als gute Gründe. Ich werde das in meinem Vortrag bestreiten. Ich glaube eigentlich, dass Vertrauen immer mit einer Kette von guten Gründen verbunden ist. Und der zweite Punkt ist, was im neuen Vortrag impliziert da war, und zwar die Frage, wohin mit Europa, oder die Frage, was für eine Vorgegründe eigentlich Europa sein soll oder ist. Also, ich fange jetzt an. The terms trust and transparency have often been used in political jargon, but their theoretical content stays underdefined. Usually, as also this conference is confirmed, they refer to the type of action between people, hence our disposition of human interaction. In my paper, as it contains well soon, I want to ask a different question. That is the role of trust and transparency in relation to citizens to political institutions. As I go one step beyond the human interaction in already existing society and ask about the relation of citizens to the institutions that govern them. Ja, also Entschuldigung, ja. Ich habe die Tendenz, ziemlich schnell zu reden, Entschuldigung. To make more specific, I want to discuss the state of affairs when citizens express their trust in their institutions. To answer this question, it is necessary to analyze the process of justification of these institutions. Only secondary, I will ask how this trust influences the relation between citizens. Hence, my paper is going to be split in three parts. In the first part, I will ask the question of justification of institutions for a domestic society and try to position the ideas of trust and transparency into those coordinates. In the second, the idea will be looked at from the perspective of national relations. And in the third, it will be tested, the results will be tested on the idea of European Union and its members. The idea of justification of political institutions has always been one of the key issues of political philosophy. Here, I'm going to use a specific model of justification, that of John Rawls, for a few reasons. First, Rawls is the most influential political philosopher of the 20th century. He uses the elements of traditional liberal theory of Kant and Mill and applies them to a modern world. He explicitly splits social reality into political and comprehensive spheres, and in that sense recognizes the important fact in modern life, that is cultural pluralism. He takes men, that is states, as they are, and makes laws as they may be. Hence his theory is morally demanding, but practically possible, and as such a middle way between realism and utopia, hence likely to be effective. To justify institutions in a domestic society, Rawls uses threefold justification. The first part of justification is concerned with values. That part is exemplified with the idea of original position. Rawls is asking from us to imagine an original position, a modern version of the state of nature, in which parties are under the veil of ignorance. That is, they are stripped from all the subjective knowledge. They do not know their position in the society, but have general knowledge about facts of life, which are, there is a plurality of cultures, there is scarcity of goods. It is in human nature that everyone wants to better more and less of those goods. Everyone has more or less similar capabilities for achieving their life plans, and everyone has equal right to ask for support for their life plans. Parties in the original position have knowledge of science and humanities, well, meaning general knowledge. These parties then they deliberate about political institutions, And they chose such principles that are to take care of each person's rights and liberties and provide for distributive measures in such a way as for those that are least advantaged to be satisfied. The veil of ignorance serves them to eliminate contingencies of life, or rather, to eliminate undeserved inequalities. The second part of justification is from the perspective of everyday men. A philosopher living here and now in a modern liberal state and holding some judgments or some of his convictions to be true. Example of these truth convictions are slavery is bad, wealth should not play a role in just political institutions, etc. These are, as Rawls called them, considered judgments. And these considered judgments have to agree then with values decided upon in original position. If they don't, something needs to be changed, either a value from original position or a considered judgment. This will be decided in the process of back and forth thinking called a reflective equilibrium. Actually, equilibrium is that state of affairs when the values and these considered judgments reach equilibrium, so they concord. The third aspect of justification concerns justification from the perspective of an ideal citizen living in their ideal institutions. These, once in place, need to be affirmed by all, and all need to know that everybody else affirmed them. This is the ideal public reason. After performing a complex but rather comprehensible method of justification, the reasons for specific institutional design and their final products are open to public scrutiny at any time. Hence, they are transparent. So the method is transparent and the results are transparent and debatable. This whole justification construct is once more stressing the realm of the political. It is not a priori derived from a practical reason. It is a matter of reflection about the possible values and about the current reality, and matter of public debate. Such justification pays respect to the idea of multiculturalism. It is neither solely dogmatically liberal, nor does it affirm just one kind of liberalism. It is sensitive to people's different preferences, different life plans, consequently different comprehensive ideas about life in general, and it tries to find an overlapping consensus among all. This overlapping consensus is then the domain of political, that is the domain of institutions. Hence, people are ready to comply with it, because of its multi-layered but comprehensible and enlightened justification, and its debatable and again transparent and public results. People's readiness to comply makes the whole system stable. Stable is that scheme of cooperation that has basic values that are willingly acted upon. For this, one needs trust. Legitimate institutions can easily practice their coercive powers if someone tries to defect. However, it cannot be the only force that is generating social cohesion. Otherwise, we will be living in Hobbesian, egoistic, or modus vivendi society. Transparent and trustworthy institutions generate forces that lead people to act kindly towards each other and not to defect, because that distorts the system of society and does damage to others as well as to themselves. This is a kind of artificial social motivation, a product of human reasoning and reflection about the conditions of social cooperation. Just institutions have conditioned it. Hence, just institutions help develop a conception of social world in which culturally different individuals trust each other. Trust towards others is recognized against the background of institutions and as interpreted by one's view of the self in the society. Society which respects one's preferences and takes care of one's life plans. This develops then the trust towards those citizens. It is being generated by the trust of each in the institutions, triggered by the transparent justification of these, and it is this intertwined scheme what makes political life somewhat predictable and safe. Now let us look at the international case. International case is somewhat more complex. It can go in two directions, either toward forming a regional, all-encompassing state, or as forming a loose federation. Rawls chooses the latter. He again uses threefold justification. That from the perspective of individuals in the original position, that of you and me, or normal citizens of the world, and that of some citizens in some ideal state reflecting on foreign policy of that state. The representatives in the original position do not know the size of the territory of their country, the demographic characteristics of the population, or the relative economic strength of their society. Here, the veil of ignorance brackets not personal, but social or communal characteristics. However, the representatives have general knowledge about world geography, economics, mathematics laws, environmental laws, importance of religion, etc. And they know that the societies they represent have institutions worth protecting. This means that the representatives know that the people who live in those societies are satisfied and that this should not be endangered. Representatives are considered to be free and equal. However, freedom and equality here are to be taken only as an analogy to the freedom and equality from the first original position. Here, freedom and equality refers not to typically liberal characteristic, but to standard notion of international law. Sovereign states are to be taken as free and equal partners. Truly sovereign are those states that make up for the well-being of their citizens, secure their basic human rights, and do not start wars for any reason other than self-defense. Representatives of these truly sovereign states in the original position choose that kind of principle for international interaction that are to forbear any future war, maybe help each other in times of distress, and secure a steady prosperity for its people. Second point of view, or second part of justification, is that of you and me, clearly are members of specific states. We correct in the process of reflection the norms chosen in the original position. On the hand of our realistic considered judgments about international relations. Third point of view envisions a public forum where representatives of states are to express their concerns about the ideal state of affairs. The whole system is imagined as a functional intergovernmental network, the Rawlsian system of international relations. So it's a functional intergovernmental network of organization that has for its final goal additional protection and support of a well-ordered nation-state. There is in Rawls's version no transnational distributive principle envisioned because that would infringe states' economic sovereignty, but it envisions business or economic international cooperation. In that sense, it respects again relative cultures. First and foremost, the respect is due to the achievements done on the national level. This is a conclusion also reasonable from a point of view of the supervisors of us who are living in the nation states and who think it to be an important fact of our political life. Now, this kind of functional federation of liberal states, which primarily respects the autonomy of each well-ordered liberal state and does everything that it is in its power for the liberal state to prosper, it is quite transparently justified. The individuals living in those states, in analog to the trust they have towards their internal institution, also owe trust to the foreign policy of their states, because the foreign policy is made in such a manner as to support their life references to international functional relations. As these functional connections between states prove to be efficient, the states develop an ever more relationship of trust among each other. The democratic peace thesis, for example, is based in part of this trust. In democracies, it is the peoples who have the final say, and so long as national and international systems work for the benefit of the people, as in democracies do, the people are supported. War is not in the interest of people, hence democracies do not go to war with each other. Rawls's idea is that over time, this kind of This kind of structure will develop trust and affinity among different states of people, or different peoples, and will gradually encompass the whole world. But the relatively narrow circle of mutually caring peoples in the world today may expand over time and must never be viewed as fixed. Gradually, peoples come to endorse their liberal and decent civilization and culture until eventually they become ready to act on the ideas and principles their civilization specifies. The other line of thinking would advocate a complete analogy with the domestic case. The parties are to decide on the norms for institutions in a global, or in our case, because we're discussing the European Union, regional position. According to this position, if the veil of ignorance is supposed to exclude us from knowledge about morally arbitrary facts, then the country we're born into is certainly one of them. All people should be treated equally, and there should be a consensus of guaranteed human rights, as well as distributive principles. These guarantees and distributions may be done by local offices, but they are merely delegating decisions made on a global, more general level. Therefore, this position says that institutions are justified or unjustified if they take into account and consider rights and liberties and distributional shares, that is, life preferences of all the people equally, regardless of their country of origin. Well-being of all individuals is compared according to the same criteria. This position uses the device of original position, putting all the individuals under it, but does not use other justificatory elements as reflective equilibrium or public reason. This makes this version, in my view, more dogmatic and with less heuristic potential. States, that said, would not be important and would not have any legislative but only executive power. Legislation would be a global, or in our case, regional means. This picture is far from being anything like a considered judgment of you and I, or by contemporary worlds or European leaders. It might be taken under consideration as hypothesis, as Kant puts it, but in cases it is too ambitious and therefore useless as a specific guideline. Secondly, the question imposes if equality of human beings is an argument for a wide regional union, like European Union. Why not a worldwide union? If parties in this larger original position perceive themselves as being equal, then after the veil has been lifted, they might find themselves in societies that perceive freedom and equality differently than illiberal societies. The liberal ideal, which they would need to abide by and which would be proclaimed publicly, would be taken as imperialistic and certainly would not lead to a peaceful and stable world. If we focus on the regional context, where all the countries are liberal, then there's the question of borders. How far is regional? How far is Europe? And even if we decide on definite borders of Europe, an overreaching union of peoples will involve some population that now lives in states that are still in the transition period, like Serbia, for example, where liberalism is still in making, and some freedoms considered as basic in those advanced liberal countries, like, for example, gay marriage, will be taken as unimaginable for a population of a country like Serbia. To conclude, there are two major objections to this wide regional cosmopolitan view. First, these thinkers take the liberal conception of justice in its Rawlsian version, with free and equal moral persons, at its base for a global standard. In doing so, they deny the plurality of conceptions of justice and are being simply dogmatic. Second, the approach does not prescribe any normative values to states as institutions. That is, it does not take different constitutions as the expressions of different conceptions of justice worthy of being preserved as such. It gives them a purely instrumental role. States as regional institutions are there only to put into practice the principles arrived at the global level through global original position. However, these smaller units do not generate any special rights or duties. Even more so, it turns the question of distributive justice, for example, into the question of universal virtue, and hence the approach distances itself from the real-world politics. While Rawls's model starts from the equality of different cultures and freedom of practicing it, cosmopolitans or wide regional thinkers start from free and equal individuals and impose liberal criteria to the world at large. It denies normative value to groups of any kind. The method does not use, as already said, reflective equilibrium, but rather appeals only to the reasonable thinking of those based in liberal countries. In my view, Rawls's version is durable and realistic. Its arguments are more clear, comprehensible, and more stable and trustworthy. And it works on the gradual development of the affinity among peoples. So what I have tried to do in these first two sections is to give a solid or transparent or understandable justification, although it may be complicated for those that are not familiar with this Rawlsian thinking, for some possible trustworthy institutions. So I gave two paradigmatic international or global, however you want to call it, cases. And now let's look at the European Union and see whether we can position it into one of those presented cases. When I look at the European Union, I look at, on one hand, to its historical development in order to analyze the evolution of the idea, and on the other, at the specific institutional structure. European Union is the union of 27 states. It developed gradually. It started with the coal and steel community in 1951. The community was formed by 6 states and was clearly an intergovernmental organization run by capable technocrats with the goal of fulfilling some functional purpose, economic and industrial. Ever more common functions, for example, atomic energy, defense, were said to be commonly practiced by the members of the community. Ever more members joined the community. By the 1993, the Treaty of Maastricht, when it became a union, and consisted of 3 pillars. First, the European Communities pillar, managed economic, social, and environmental policies. It was the only pillar with a legal personality, consisting of European Community, the European Coal and Steel Community, and European Atomic Energy. And it was the only supranational body. And the second pillar was a common foreign and security policy. Pillar took care of foreign policy and military matters. And the third pillar was police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters. And it brought together cooperation in the fight against crime. Within each pillar, a different balance was struck between supranational and international groups. It was desired to add powers to the community in the areas of foreign policy, security and defense policy, asylum and immigration policy, criminal cooperation and judicial cooperation. However, some member states opposed the addition of these powers to the community on the grounds that they would be too sensitive to national sovereignty. As a result, these additional matters were not included in the first pillar, which was supranational, but were taken in the form of 2 additional pillars. As the European Union started off as a 2-headed creature, the supranational and intergovernmental one, with no clear idea where it is headed towards, whether towards one federal state of Europe or supranational loose federation. Amendments to the Treaty of Maastricht by the Treaty of Amsterdam and Treaty of Nice made the additional pillars increasingly supranational. Most important among these were the transfer of policy of asylum, migration and judicial cooperation in civil matters to the first pillar. On these core ideas one of the core ideas was to abolish the pillar structure and replace it with a merged legal personality of the Union. This idea was included in the Treaty of Lisbon, 2009. With legal personality, the Union is, for instance, able to take part in international treaties and obtain the membership of World Trade Organization. It has a foreign ministry and maybe a tariff presidency. So it seems as if it is headed towards one large state. But is it? The European Union has 7 successive enlargements of membership and has become very diverse both in cultures and its social and economic standards. There are supposedly split competencies that belong to the domain of the EU solely, and those that are still under the jurisdiction of nation-state. And there are some competencies that are executed by the nation-state, but supported by the European Union. However, these distinctions are not clear at all. Socrates said still to be in power of nation-state. Hence, if a law is agreed that is not to the liking of the state, it may withdraw from the European Union to avoid it. This, however, has not happened yet, as the benefits of membership are often seen to outweigh the potentially negative impact of specific law. Furthermore, concessions and political pressure may lead the state accepting something not in their immediate interest in order to improve relations or strengthen their position on other issues. The question of whether EU law is superior to national law is subject to some debate. The treaties, which are intergovernmental documents, do not give a judgment on these matters. However, EU court judgments have established EU law's superiority over national law, and it has been affirmed in a declaration attached to the Treaty of Lisbon. However, some national legal systems also explicitly accept court's interpretation, such as France and Italy. Some implicitly accept it, like Germany, but some deny it, like Poland. So it's a legal, practically it's a legal mess. If we look at how institutions are set, basically there is the European Council, which is consisted of heads of governments, and its role is to set the EU's overall political direction. There are three main institutions involved in EU legislation: the European Parliament, which represents EU citizens and is directly elected by them; the Council of the European Union, which represents the governments of the individual member countries; and the European Commission, which represents the interest of the Union as a whole, again set by the individual countries that send their commissioners. Together, these three institutions produce the policies and laws that apply to how the European Union. In principle, the Commission proposes new laws, and the Parliament and the Council adopt them. The Commission then, and the member countries then, implement them, and the Commission ensures that the laws are properly applied, and two other institutions play a vital role. Already mentioned Court of Justice upholds the rule of European law, and the Court of Auditors, which checks the financing of EU activities. The powers and responsibilities of all these institutions are laid down in treaties, which are the foundation of everything the EU does. They also lay down the rules and procedures that the EU institutions must follow. The treaties are agreed by the presidents or prime ministers of the EU countries and ratified by the parliaments of the countries. Now, how transparent are those institutions, and how well do they listen to European demos? Does European demos have a say at all? As we have many times heard in this conference, it does not. And so presented, it seems as if EU, or rather its members, do not have a strong or clear idea about where they are institution-wise headed. In these circumstances, it is not surprising that the proposal of EU constitutions failed to gain people's support, or rather people's trust, and the referendums on the constitution of the EU failed in France and Netherlands. The idea of ever more union lacks trust by common people. In EU, there is a trend of putting the process of generating trust, explained in previous sections of my paper, upside down. There has been a vast literature and many campaigns that try to underline the notion of European identity, as if the existence of some collective European identity per se generates the trust in the European Union's institutions. Even if there exists something like the European identity, some unifying common feature, the most it can do is give us normative criteria for normative assessment of the institutions and policies, not to commend our fidelity to the existing ones. Furthermore, if there is such a common identity, that can, one, generate confidence, trust and understanding, and it would mean that EU liberalism has become comprehensive and dogmatic, not open to diversity, which was one of the great values of European communities. What EU, in my opinion, needs to clarify, on a hand theoretical explanation given in previous sections, are the following issues. All the issues connect and overlap. How to reconcile unity and diversity. This problem is connected to the idea of European identity and creates confusion in the institutional allocation of powers and in security issues, as well as in the issues of possible unified foreign policy of the Union. Second, how to solve the problem of dual ontology. The EU needs to clarify the moral standing of both individuals and states and their relations to each other and to the Union. This means clearly assigning normative priorities. And third, Europe needs to decide upon its leading ideas. In EU, there is, from a perspective of common citizens, an institutional chaos, and no solid or transparent theory in the background, and has no trust in its institutions. This is what EU desperately needs, and an ideology and direction towards where it is headed. Since I started with John Rawls, it is only fair to finish with him. Rawls does not mention European integration in any of his written works. However, in letters that he exchanged with Philippe van Parijs, he expresses his opinion in a clear manner. He explains why he does not believe it to be durable, and in that sense useful to apply the concepts of distributive justice he suggests for the domestic society to international realm. Quote, one question the Europeans should ask themselves, if I may hazard the suggestion, is how far-reaching they want their union to be. It seems to me that much would be lost if the European Union became a federal union like that of the United States. Here, there is a common language of political discourse and a ready willingness to move from one state to another. Isn't there a conflict between a large, free and open market comprising of all of Europe and the individual nation-states, each with its separate political and social institutions, historical memories, and forms and traditions of social policy? Surely, these are great value to the citizens of these countries that give meaning to their life. The large open market, including all of Europe, is aim of the large banks and the capitalist business class whose main goal is simply a larger profit. The idea of economic growth, onwards and upwards, with no specific end in sight, fits this class perfectly. If they speak about the distribution, it's almost always in terms of trickle down. The long-term result of this, which we already have in the United States, is a civil society awash in a meaningless consumerism of some kind. I can't believe that that is what you want in Europe. Although Rawls' remarks on the European Union are made only in personal letter and cannot be taken as definite elaborate position, these remarks are worth taking seriously because, for once, they can be interpreted on the background of Rawls' overall view, and secondly, on the background of recent economic events in Greece. Rawls' position is hence shared by many social democrats. EU establishes the European-wide market, but it does not establish a European-wide welfare regime that can adequately compensate for the losers in the European market. Hence, EU is not a single state, but also not a sole intergovernmental body. What it is not clear, and before it becomes clear, it cannot be trusted. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank, Milica. Wir führen auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch fort.